for me, when you're traveling, people will say, what protein bars do you bring? And I was like, I bring beef jerky, I bring salted macadamia nuts, I bring some dark chocolate, I bring electrolytes. I keep it pretty simple. And sometimes if there's really nothing to eat in an airport and traveling back and forth across the US, sometimes there are great airports for food and others they're not.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I am very excited to have Cynthia Thurlow on the line with us. She worked in clinical medicine, both in the ER and cardiology for nearly 20 years. And she says that although she respects the power of conventional medicine to treat disease and save lives, she began to think more about the root causes of the chronic health issues. She soon realized the powerful relationship between food and her patients' health and wellness, and it led her to do advanced training in nutrition and functional testing so that she could help others enjoy optimal health before they needed emergency care, like she did at one point in her life. She is the author of the book called Intermittent Fasting Transformation, the 45-day program for women to lose stubborn weight, improve hormonal health, and slow aging. And although a lot of her content may be geared towards women, I find that pretty much many, if not all of the same concepts also apply to men as well. So Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks so much. I've really been looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, likewise. So let's start with a little bit of a background about your story. I know you were kind of in medicine and kind of made a little transition there.
Yeah. So as a nurse practitioner, I worked in clinical cardiology for 16 years. And over the course of getting married, having children, I spent many years, as many of us do, when we have little people at home, you're preoccupied with their care and their needs. And as I came out of the haze of sleep deprivation and raising little people, I started to realize that I was less and less vested in a traditional allopathic model. Now, let me be clear, I never compromised patient care, but I started talking to my patients more about nutrition, sleep, stress management. And unfortunately, we have conditioned our patients to believe that a pill fixes everything. And yet, lifestyle as medicine is equally, if not even more important than medication. And there's no shame for people that do need to take medication. I take thyroid replacement therapy every day, and I'm totally fine with that. But over time, I became increasingly disillusioned with writing a lot of prescriptions. And you can imagine in cardiology, when we have patients who have diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, a myriad of health problems, I just got disillusioned with the traditional model. And so in 2016, I left clinical medicine and pivoted and jumped into an entrepreneurial lifestyle where I was able to pretty quickly develop one-on-one programs and group programs, later went on to do a couple TED Talks, created a podcast. And as I tell everyone, I'm still in service to others, but I'm on a larger platform where I'm able to impact more lives than I ever did before. And my roots are in ER medicine and cardiology, and I still am fascinated with the medical community. But I do find that if we focus more on the things that we do day to day at home that we have a little more control over, that I can get a whole lot farther with my patients than I ever could just increasing diabetes medication or antihypertensives for blood pressure. And so I very humbly sit back and say that, we all have the ability to pivot irrespective of what age we are. And we still have an ability to contribute to our communities. And so I can sit back and I say that, that nursing and nurse practitioner background has made all the difference in my life. And I'm so grateful for it. But now I get to connect with more people like yourself and others and help inspire more people to take better care of themselves.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I agree. Obviously, medicine has its place, right? But I think the key here is that it's kind of reactive, right? And if people are, okay, so they're getting prescribed a medication, great. Now, did they change their lifestyle at all? That's really the question, and I think some of the things that you've seen, let's talk about that. What are some of the things you're seeing when people versus just being prescribed a pill versus making lifestyle changes?
Well, I can't tell you how many people that I have helped in conjunction with their primary care providers or internists get off of their blood pressure lowering medication. For an example, we know at the root of most, if not all, chronic disease states here in the United States and abroad is insulin resistance. And so for many individuals, whether they realize it or not, at the root cause of most of the high blood pressure problems we see is latent insulin resistance. And as I help people explore what contributes to this, it isn't just lifestyle. Some of it's life stage. We know as women are progressing into perimenopause and menopause, men go through andropause. They can start losing some degree of insulin sensitivity. It is equally powerful to make sure you're sleeping through the night, because we know that impacts not just glucose regulation and insulin, but also hormones like leptin and ghrelin. We know chronic stress can raise cortisol. And as I remind people, cortisol is not a bad hormone. It gets a bad rap. But when your cortisol is chronically elevated, you will not be able to lose weight. Cortisol is one of these hormones that's designed to be this emergency backup system. And when cortisol is high, glucose is high. If glucose is high, insulin is high. And if insulin is high, you are not going to be able to tap into fat stores to use energy. I talk a great deal about meal frequency, something as simple as eating less often. A lot of people don't like the word fast or fasting, but even if every person listening did 12 hours of digestive rest, that is a profoundly impactful impact on our bodies. And then, looping around to nutrition, most of our diets here in the United States, 70% of us are eating ultra processed foods. I'm not talking about a food that has 3 ingredients. I'm talking about foods that have multi-layered, non-pronounceable, non-recognizable ingredients, a lot of artificial sugars and or seed oils, things that we know are inflammatory and detrimental to our health. And then just looping in the impact of the changes, as I mentioned, that we're experiencing going from being 20s and 30s into middle age and beyond. Understanding what's happening in our bodies at a hormonal level, I think, is very, very helpful. So when I reflect back on things that we've been able to do with patients, less medication, maybe no medication, getting patients to a point where they're sleeping restfully through the night, they wake up refreshed, they're able to contribute more to their community, their families, show up at work differently. People have changed their entire paradigm around food. So they're no longer having cravings, they're eating for satiety, which is huge. And then I also think about the chronic stress piece, that many people don't understand that their lifestyles are eroding their health. And I will use myself as an example that before I left clinical medicine, my husband traveled internationally. My boys were young. I worked a very stressful, demanding job. Nurse practitioners in my state are now fully autonomous. At the time, we were not. But in many instances, if my cardiologist, the physician I was working with, was not in the hospital, we were the backup. We were the ones making life and death decisions. And I took my job very seriously. And so chronic stress, over-exercising, maybe I was, when you're in the hospital, it's nearly impossible to eat a good amount of food because your options are to eat on the go. I ate a lot of protein bars, which I'm not happy to admit that I did, but sometimes it was that or eat nothing. And so those things over time, it creates a domino effect. And many of us are living lifestyles that are not sustainable or healthy. And so I use myself as an example that I crashed and burned in my early 40s because I was doing all of those things I just mentioned. And I'm not suggesting that an entrepreneurial lifestyle is the right decision for everyone, but for me, it's allowed me to create a much healthier boundary around lifestyle as medicine and to have more control over how I choose to live my life and how I choose to show up. And so I'm always talking to my patients about changes that they can make. I'll give you another example. I have many healthcare providers that are patients, and many of them work night shift, or they flip-flop between day shift, night shift. And we know individuals that work night shifts, whether they're healthcare practitioners, whether they're police officers, EMS, et cetera. We know that impacts your metabolic health. We know that it impacts your risk for certain chronic disease states, including certain types of cancers. And so for many of those individuals, helping them make decisions that are in their best interests, that in many instances have allowed them to have better blood sugar control. They've gotten off a working night shift. They're getting better quality sleep. So it always goes back to this pattern of lifestyle as medicine first. And then if someone still needs medication, there's no shame in that, but they still have a firm foundation of the right principles. They're going to set them up for success.
Yeah, absolutely. I like how you said about giving yourself at least a 12-hour digestive rest, right? And using that kind of terminology for it rather than just fasting, which kind of a lot of people may be afraid of, but just it's really simple, right? I mean, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. or 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., right? 12 hours, giving yourself a digestive rest makes a lot of sense. Now, yeah, let's talk a little bit about fasting since you wrote a book about it. What is the recommended, what do you recommend? And is it different for men and women?
Oh, absolutely. So I would first say that fasting has gotten a bad rap, but fasting is not new or novel. It dates back to biblical times. So it's part of, all three major religions. Even within my own faith, it is part of many periods throughout the year. And so when we talk about fasting, it's talking about eating less often. The average American is consuming food 6 to 10 times a day. And when you start to understand that the frequency of meals and snacks and sugar sweetened beverages is really eroding our metabolic health, it makes sense that we should really eat, wait 4 or 5 hours and then eat another meal, wait 4 or 5 hours and then eat another meal. So when I'm first having the conversations with patients or clients, it's helping them understand this is the way our bodies are designed to thrive. We have not always as a species had accessibility to food in this surplus in our entire evolution. And so understanding that having access to hyper-processed, highly crave-inducing foods on a daily basis or throughout the week or the month is eroding our health on such a significant level. So when I talk about fasting, it's helping them understand it's not new or novel. Sometimes instead of saying the word fasting, which can be triggering for some individuals, we just talk about, if you don't eat from when you finish dinner until you eat breakfast the next day, you probably are already doing 12 or 13 hours of digestive rest. So it's finding that reframe to explain this without making it sound restrictive, harsh, punishing, because many people are fearful of not eating. They've been conditioned to believe that we eat to stoke our metabolism or we eat to keep our blood sugar stable. Well, yes and no. It's what we eat that definitely has a positive or negative impact on our blood sugar regulation. And most of us are not eating the right way. So it's helping people understand that you can successfully go from dinner to breakfast, understanding that when you break your fast, whether it's at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., 2 p.m., that we always want to be including at least 30 grams of protein. Protein is going to help with not just satiety, but it's also going to help with blood sugar regulation. It's also going to help with muscle protein synthesis. And for anyone that's listening is saying, what in the world are you talking about? Satiety is fullness. So we know even if you look at the research that's been done, that first meal of the day is the most important meal for setting up blood sugar control throughout the day, but also cravings. So if you sit down and eat a big bowl of oatmeal or a big bowl of cereal, or you sit down and eat maybe you're using leftover pasta from the night before with no protein, you're going to have a much different blood sugar response. And you're not going to be nearly as satiated than if you sit down and have leftovers from the night before, or you have a piece of chicken, a piece of fish, a piece of steak, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you definitely want to have at least 30 grams of protein because that is what helps stimulate this term muscle protein synthesis, which is what helps your body build and maintain lean muscle tissue. And why this is important is that north of 40 years old, we start having this acceleration of muscle loss. Why is this important? Muscle is this organ of longevity. It is also critically important for insulin sensitivity. And so you hear me talking about insulin over and over and over again. Insulin resistance is what's at the basis for poor metabolic health. It can also contribute to a myriad of health issues. But maintaining insulin sensitivity is one of the most important things you can do for your health. So when we're eating adequate amounts of protein, when we are lifting weights, when we are getting enough sleep, we are setting this up because there's a process that's called sarcopenia, muscle loss with aging. It is going to happen whether you want it to or not. So you have to work against it. And I'm very visual. So I always like to depict this as young looking muscle is a fillet. I think probably everyone listening understands what a filet mignon looks like versus a delicious ribeye. Yes, it's good, but it has a lot of fat and marbling. That is what old muscle looks like. And that's what starts to happen is that we will get infiltration of the muscle with adipose tissue and it becomes less metabolically active. We are more likely to become increasingly insulin resistant. And it also contributes to other issues like things like frailty. Like I look at my parents who are both in their 70s, and as they are getting farther along in this process, a little more frailty, they're not as physically active, they're not as strong. I used to take care of a lot of patients that were the age that I am now, who could not get off a bedside commode or toilet in the hospital because their quadricep muscles, which are their big leg muscles, were not strong enough to do that. We don't want to become frail. And so when I'm talking about intermittent fasting, it's helping people understand you can eat within that feeding window, get enough protein in with each meal. You are not starving yourself. That is not what we're talking about, but it's having a compressed feeding window so that you are going longer periods with promoting this digestive rest. And I think for a lot of people, they associate fasting with caloric reduction or weight loss. And I remind people, yes, there's a curiosity. Everyone's looking for the next great thing. They want to know what's the next great thing. Right now, it's GLP-1 agonists, these injectable drugs that people are using to lose weight. And perhaps we'll touch on some of the considerations that come along with that. But I remind people that it's all the other benefits of fasting that will keep people doing it. Things like mental clarity, improved cognition, more energy, improved digestive rest, improved biophysical markers. Like, again, what I mentioned earlier, people getting off their blood pressure medications, their diabetes medications, less lipid lowering agents, a reduction in neurocognitive disorders. Now, I'm at a stage of life, like I think a lot about not wanting to be a burden to my family later in life. So things like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes of the brain. And women in many ways are protected from this until they go into menopause. But men are also at risk for neurocognitive things. So that's a basic explanation along with this process of autophagy. So what starts to happen after the age of 40? We start having more mitochondrial dysfunction. And the mitochondria are the powerhouses of our cells. They're intricately involved with generating energy. This is where you see people say, oh, I'm X number of age. I just expect to be tired and aches and pains. That is driven in many ways by mitochondrial dysfunction. So when you are in a fasted state, you can upregulate something called autophagy, which is this waste and recycling process. It's like your body is taking out the garbage. It's taking out disease, disordered organelles, mitochondria that have the potential to go on and create disease. So it is a very powerful strategy. It may not be right for everyone, but it is different for men and women. And I'll just tie this up by saying menopausal women and men have the easiest time with fasting because there is less hormonal fluctuation. Women at that stage of life are not dealing with the hormonal fluctuations between estrogen and progesterone that can drive where they are in their menstrual cycle. And just to kind of tie this up, when women are still in their peak cycling years, so under the age of 35, and women that are perimenopausal, that 5 to 10 years preceding menopause, these are the women that I always say we have to be mindful of nutrient depletion. Our bodies are exquisitely attuned to how much we are eating or how little. And our menstrual cycle is one of many vital signs that we want to be attuned to. So this is where I always say less is more when it comes to younger women. It's not to suggest that younger women that are lean and fit can't fast on occasion, but maybe they're doing 12 hours of digestive rest, or maybe a perimenopausal woman is just fasting within the follicular phase when estrogen predominates in the cycle as opposed to right before they get their menstrual cycle. But yes, women do definitely need to approach it differently. But menopausal women and men, it's a whole lot easier for them than for younger women.
Yeah, that's really great information. And for those who are thinking that fasting is like too hard, I just want to give a quick story, maybe just to blow out the boundaries of what people are thinking. And I don't recommend that anyone do this, but just to kind of blow your boundaries, I recently sat down with a friend of mine who finished a 21-day water fast. Literally 21 days, only water, not even salt or anything else. Now, he had a skin condition that was driving him crazy. And so he just said, I don't care what I have to do. And it has helped him. He's actually done this on a few different occasions. It does help him. Now, I do question his vegan diet and lack of protein, potentially when he's not doing these fasts. But I really more tell the story as something to kind of, if you think you can't fast for 12 hours or a day. And yes, you need to be, if you're very overweight and you're used to eating all these processed foods and you're not metabolically flexible, again, maybe you start with a 12-hour and work your way up a little bit more from there. And I'm not recommending that anyone do anything near. He by the way, he was being monitored by, a professional and doing this, in a very specific way. But I couldn't believe it. I was like, what, 21 days, all you drank was water? That's insane. How do you even survive? And you can. Our bodies can survive and do a lot more. And actually the cleansing benefits, many people will say are are pretty extreme. So if you think you can't fast for 12 hours, I bet you can.
Yeah, no, the only concerns, and I'm glad that your friend had this medically supervised water fast, because that's important to identify. My greatest concern is with really long fasts is this loss of muscle mass, because over 24 hours, if you're already lean, like I'm a very healthy weight. I'm pretty lean. I don't do long fasts anymore. I don't see the utility of it. But if someone is not metabolically healthy, not insulin sensitive, perhaps diabetic, in a medically supervised environment, 3 to 5 day fast can be very powerful to kind of get things reset. And what's interesting is even thin people have plenty of stored fat to use as fuel. It's just we as a culture are not comfortable with being hungry, because we're so rarely hungry, because we're so overfed. But I think on a lot of different levels, there can be benefits. If people have an autoimmune condition, sometimes doing longer fasts can be medically appropriate to help kind of reset the gut microbiome. Certainly we look at the aging literature that's out there, the work of people like Walter Longo, who talk about telomere length and DNA repair and things that are very, very powerful. But I think used in the right way, and again, medically supervised, some of those longer fasts can be very beneficial.
Yeah. And surprisingly, he was already fairly skinny. So he didn't have like a ton of muscle on him, but he showed me a before and after, and it wasn't really that big. I would have thought it would have been a much bigger difference, and that he would have lost a lot more muscle. Maybe he couldn't tell because he was already pretty skinny, but it really wasn't that huge of a difference after 21 days of no eating, which was really fascinating to me. But I'm more like you on your side. I'm kind of still in muscle building mode. I've put on a decent amount of muscle over the past year. I'm 190 pounds now, so I'm typically trying to get 150 grams of protein a day at least, when, as I'm lifting weights, especially. And so, yeah, typically for me, I will do more of like a 12-hour, but then it's interesting because if you're only eating 3 meals a day, right? If I'm 190 pounds, I'm trying to get 150 grams of protein. If I only eat 3 meals a day, even if they're 40 grams of protein in each meal, it's still only 120 grams. So I'm typically having to throw in a protein shake, maybe right after the gym, which is another 40 grams. And then that'll get me to 160 or so. And that's probably where I want to be. Again, I'm an active male trying to actively build muscle. So other people might have different goals than me.
Yeah, and I think it's okay. Unfortunately, we're in this very orthorexic culture where people were like, "Oh, you should never have a protein bar and you should never ever have a protein shake." Well, I think we're all just trying to do the very best that we can, and there are certainly days where I'm super active, and sitting down for 2 or 3 meals sometimes can be challenging. And I think a protein shake is absolutely appropriate. I think the thing that we're striving for is consistency, not perfection.
Yeah.
And so for myself, like I'm an ectomorph, so I'm lean, but it's hard for me to build muscle. And that's just how my body is made. I have to be very diligent about lifting weights. I have to be very diligent about my protein. I never get less than 100 grams of protein. And I always have at least 2, if not 3 meals. And that's something that's an important distinction. There's a lot of people out there that are doing OMAD, and maybe men can get 100 plus grams of protein in a meal. Most women can't. And I always say, if you can and you're a unicorn, that's fantastic. But I find that there are still people, men and women, that overfast. Like they're doing too much fasting, too little food. They're really getting to a point where they're negatively impacting their metabolism. And there's a couple haters that are out there. They always kind of crop up across social media. And I'm just like, listen, I'm just telling you, my greatest concern is loss of muscle mass. And for that reason, this is why I think we actually benefit from at least 2 distributions of food throughout a feeding window. Does that mean that we're perfect every day? Absolutely not. If we're traveling or we're stressed, we may not always make the best, food choices, but I think it's consistency over time is really what we're aiming for, and not perfection.
Yeah, definitely. So it sounds like you're a big fan of protein and kind of prioritizing protein as well. Do you have any favorite types of protein?
Yeah, I would say this is the irony is I was hospitalized 5 years ago, and I've always been a healthy eater, but I really have focused in on some of the ancestral meats since I got out of the hospital. So I really like bison. I'll have elk. I like wild boar. I mean, it's an accessibility piece. So I have to plan ahead if I want. Bison you can find in most grocery stores, but if you want elk or even elk sausage, requires a little more effort. We try to make sure that we are getting a well-rounded amount of protein. So whether or not it's fish, I like salmon. I just don't eat it every day. My family is tolerant of fish. They don't love it. My family likes meat. So we have a lot of steak. Chicken is not our favorite meat, or poultry for that matter. But, occasionally we'll have duck. But I think it's important to have some variety. I mean, I love bacon. Who doesn't love bacon? But you'll have people tell you it's terrible to eat bacon. And I'm like, there's nothing better than like a juicy, medium rare bison burger with some bacon on top of it. And I'm gluten-free and dairy-free. So for me, it's all about like non-starchy vegetables and just having lots of brightly pigmented fruits and vegetables. I would say that's probably the biggest focus, but I'm carnivore-ish. So really protein is the focus of my meals, and probably having 50 to 60 grams is what I aim for. And I have a good sense of what that is. If it's half a pound of shrimp, occasionally we'll get shrimp, but my husband's pretty picky about seafood. So we have to buy it the day of. And I'm not always as creative with meals when I'm planning, when I'm planning out my week. I'm like, okay, if I have to go buy shrimp and then I have to prepare that for tonight, it's one extra step. But definitely in our house, we like a variety. We don't like to get pigeonholed. And what I would encourage people to do is, bison sounds exotic, but whether it's a bison steak, ground bison, that seems to be a much more accessible first step. It doesn't taste gamey. I personally am not a fan of venison. I know a lot of people love venison. It's just a little too gamey for me, but trying different foods to find what you like. The first time I tried elk, we had elk sausage. I've had ostrich, not my favorite. Just being open-minded to the possibility that there might be a protein out there that you can use to kind of round out your options. Cornish hens are going to be far superior to having chicken. Unfortunately, what's done to chicken here in the United States is really a shame. And when you're looking at factory farming versus pastured, looking at the quality of your eggs. And again, I would emphasize that the most important thing is to buy what works within your budget. Like, don't listen to this and say, oh my gosh, I have to go buy all this exotic meat. Maybe start with bison. Bison is found in most grocery stores now, and prepare it like you would any other like ground beef or a bison steak. It tends to be very lean. So if you like leaner meat, that makes it a bit easier, but you don't have to go specifically searching. I have a good friend who has a kind of a tagline about the wilditarian. That's kind of her focus of her work with clients. And so she's always kind of encouraging me to think beyond the obvious. There are a lot of people that like lamb. Lamb is pretty accessible. Lamb can be strong. So for some people, if you're more sensitive to how strong something can be, goat. There's tons and tons of options. You just have to look for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of going back to your medical days and what we were talking about before, right? With seeing so many people who have diabetes or pre-diabetes in this country. And what's interesting is like, yeah, most of them just go on medication. Unfortunately, some of them have to start, taking, diabetic medication and shooting themselves every day. But it's really important. But what's interesting is not enough people talk about like literally low carb, even if it's not full on keto, right? Like literally people have reversed diabetes. There's tons of studies about like the keto diet reversing diabetes. And I'm not saying people should go keto kind of long term, but it sounds like both you and I are certainly on more of a lower carb type of diet, right? So you're prioritizing protein and you said you're kind of carnivore-ish. So you're kind of low carb as well, I would assume?
I would say not. Years ago, I would have said I'm low carb. Now I say that it's really dependent on how physically active I am. So today I lifted, I was in the gym. I usually do every other day of doing something where I'm doing strength training. Those days I liberalize my carbs. I've depleted glycogen. Yesterday I did high intensity interval training. I depleted glycogen. I went to the gym today, lifted. There's more carbohydrates in my food today than there would normally be. And by that I mean low glycemic berries. I think we're going to have some sweet potatoes tonight. But I would say I typically hover in 50 to 125 grams of total carbohydrates during the course of my day. I think when people are metabolically flexible, insulin sensitive, you can get away with more carbohydrate. And there are people out there that will say, if they look at a carbohydrate, and by that I mean like a traditional sweet potato, potatoes, etc., they'll gain weight. And so I think it really speaks to the fact of knowing your body type, whether you're mesomorph or ectomorph, you're probably going to have more wiggle room to be able to eat a little more discretionary carbohydrates versus those that are more prone to weight loss resistance, who are a little less insulin sensitive. And so I think it's, doing the testing and knowing who you are as an individual. Like I think testing a fasting insulin for everyone that's listening, whether your doctor or NP or PA knows how to interpret that, it should be between 2 to 5 milligrams per deciliter. There are plenty of labs out there that will draw labs for you without a doctor's order. And I always say you should test it a few times a year. And what's interesting is as, I have hypothyroidism, which means my thyroid is underactive and I take medication, I can always tell when my thyroid replacement needs to be adjusted because my fasting insulin will move up a little bit, like not within a non-therapeutic range. But I can't tell you how many people say, oh, my hemoglobin A1C, which is a snapshot of 90 days, my fasting glucose is fine. And then I said, well, have you checked a fasting insulin? And they find out their fasting insulin, instead of being between 2 to 5 milligrams per deciliter, it's 20. I'm like, oh, you've got the very beginning of insulin resistance. And oftentimes that biomarker will dysregulate 5 to 10 years before the rest of them will. And so I encourage people to just be conscientious, understand the way that your body is. If you are in andropause as a male, if you are in perimenopause or menopause, you're probably going to have to be more conscientious about your carbohydrates. That doesn't mean being anti-carb or carbohydrate phobic. I think things have swung the opposite direction. And obviously in the metabolic health space, a lot of people are ketogenic, which means they're even more strict about their carbohydrate intake. But I find that we want things to be sustainable over time. And I think for many people, they want to have, whether it's, they want to have an apple or they want to have a banana. Like a just green banana is one of my favorite things to eat. But if I say to the average person, oh my God, you eat a banana. And I'm like, here's the problem. We've gotten very dogmatic. And I think for a lot of individuals, it's knowing what are your personal circumstances. Many people, they could literally improve their glucose sensitivity and their blood sugar just by taking a walk after a meal, like something that simple that requires little to no effort could have a large net impact on how well they can control their blood sugar throughout the day or even overnight. And so getting back to your original question, I would say I'm carbohydrate aware, and I would say I tend to be on the lower carbohydrate because the average American eats 200 to 300 grams of carbs a day. So I am way lower than that. Right. But I'm also making sure I get my carbohydrate sources from whole, real foods. I'm not getting it from rice or pasta or bread. I'm getting it from nutrient-dense whole foods.
Yeah, interesting. I would say 50 to 125 grams of carbs per day, like you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Certainly, I'm probably in the same range. I would consider that low carb compared to the 200-300 that most people are eating for sure. Yeah, keto is more probably like under 40 grams of carbs per day, maybe even 20-30, depending on how strict you are with it. But and I think we've seen like keto long term may not be the best, but it certainly can be useful for things like reversing diabetes, if you're in that situation where you can. So what do you think about, so you mentioned rice, no rice. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of a rule for you? No grains? Some people now are saying, white rice is a great source of carbs. What are your thoughts on rice?
I think it's very bio-individual. I think for me, like I, intermittently wear a continuous glucose monitor. So I have a good sense of what my blood glucose response is to certain foods. I have teenage athletic boys. We eat a lot of rice in our house, a lot, like tons. It's an obscene amount of rice, but they're very athletic, physically active young men. When I went paleo over 10 years ago, removing gluten and grains and dairy was life-changing for me. I think that it's very individual. I mean, if I'm out to dinner and there's a little bit of rice on my plate, I might eat it, but it's not something I make for myself at home. I make it for my kids, but it's not something that I myself eat because I would rather get, as an example, if I'm going to have sweet potato or a root vegetable, I would rather get something that's got a little bit more fiber to it. But certainly there's plenty of people that do fine with grains. I just think, the glyphosate exposure combined with the blood sugar dysregulation that I see for myself, like I love plantains. It's one of the very few things, if I eat it, I will see a large blood glucose excursion, like really high. Doesn't matter how I eat them, what I eat them with. And so now I just don't eat them. But I think for each one of us, it's really the experiment and the bio-individuality piece of the N of one. So meaning for each one of us, it's finding what makes our bodies feel good, what makes us feel like we have energy. If I eat something and I want to take a nap, that's a bad sign. And so for me, right. I generally my mother's Italian. When she comes, she loves to cook quinoa. And so sometimes I will have some of that, but always small portions because it's just not something that makes me feel great. But I know plenty of other people do really well with it. And if you're physically active and insulin sensitive, I think it's completely fine.
Yeah, I found the same. When I went paleo and eliminated gluten and grains and pretty much all dairy, I'll have some cheese, some from time to time, but everything is always organic, grass-fed, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, for me, it was a total game changer in terms of lowering inflammation, which for me, we were talking about before, lowering inflammation in my mind is the most important aspect of health, right? Pretty much every disease stems from inflammation, all the pains that, I say all the time. I actually had a video that kind of went viral a little bit where I said, before you get surgery, listen to this. And it's like, people are getting back surgery, shoulder surgery, knee surgery all the time. And if you keep eating the same inflammatory foods, the pain might just pop up on your other knee or your other shoulder or something else. So I said, again, not medical advice or anything like that, but you may want to consider, if you're considering it, try going on a low inflammatory diet for a couple months and see if the pain just doesn't go away on its own before doing a surgery that could take months of rehab and all sorts of things there. So yeah, it was totally a game changer for me.
Yeah, I think it's inspiring, but it's also demonstrating to your listeners how powerful food can be. I mean, things like nightshades. So we talk about tomatoes, peppers, etc. I love tomatoes in the summertime. And, we live in a part of our state where we have access to a lot of wonderful farmers markets. And if I overdo it with tomatoes, I will get plantar fasciitis. And it's the only pain issue I will occasionally have. But I just say to my husband, okay, I've had too much tomatoes. And if I back off on the tomatoes, I have no problems. But I think for so many of us, we kind of, whether it's pain or some other sign of inflammation, for so many of us, we just chalk it up to age. We're like, oh, this is just the way things are, which I'm a firm believer of. I cry BS. I'm like, no way. I want to be as active and is physically able for as long as possible, if not in forever. And so I think there's nothing more powerful than removing a food from your diet and realizing, oh my gosh, that's actually what was contributing to why I'm having knee, ankle, hip, shoulder pain.
Yeah. Yeah. And even me too, because I heard the numbers on tomato. I don't know if it's like something like 40 or 50% of people have some sort of sensitivity to it. And I don't know for sure, but I don't really want to take that chance. And so like every once in a while, there's a Greek salad that I love that I eat sometimes. And but they put a ton of tomatoes in there. I'll leave like maybe, 2 little pieces of the tomato in there or something, but I certainly don't want to overdo it. But people might be wondering, how do I know if I have a sensitivity to something? Are there any tests that you would recommend for that, or any kind of way to know that other than just kind of self-monitoring?
Yeah, I think, if we want to make it as simple as possible, doing something like a Whole30, which is designed for 30 days, not forever. I think a lot of people take Whole30 to an extreme, but that's removing the most inflammatory foods: sugar, soy, grains, alcohol, gluten, dairy, for 30 days and seeing how you feel. And sometimes I will have women 2 weeks in that are like, I feel like a new person. Beyond that, there are companies like Genova or the MRT where you're looking at food sensitivity testing. And I think that what I've learned is a lot of people, if they can do a plain elimination diet and get 50 to 70% improvement, sometimes spending that $300 to $400 isn't as much of an interest to them as maybe do stool testing or looking at other types of testing. I use the MRT quite a bit in my practice, but I always give people the option. Do you want to just do a Whole30? And most people are willing to do that, and they get such a significant improvement. Now, one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that how impactful alcohol can be. And it's interesting, if you want to trigger a bunch of people, tell them you don't drink alcohol, because people fuss over this. Like, I'll go to a party and I'll say, well, I just don't drink. And people don't know what to do with that. I'm like, listen, I'm totally okay with this. I will have my water and a sliver of lime and I'm good. Like, for the whole night, I'm totally fine. But people are so uncomfortable with people not drinking. But they're definitely, between the pandemic and the mommy drinking culture, there is absolutely a lot of women that are drinking excessively, too often. And I would include men in that as well. I mean, we go to parties and I'm sometimes shocked. I'm like, how are people functioning the next day drinking that much alcohol? But alcohol can be one of these substances that, it lowers people's inhibitions. They feel more comfortable socially. but it ends up wrecking their sleep. It erodes REM sleep. It erodes deep sleep. It dysregulates your blood sugar. So you don't eat healthy food when you're drinking alcohol. I know I certainly didn't, during the pandemic, because I was only a social drinker. I just stopped drinking alcohol entirely. And I said, it causes me to have hot flashes and it erodes my sleep. And I'm not willing to have either of those things. So I think for each one of us, it's deciding, like, based on your budget, does it make more sense just to eliminate the food for a period of time and see if it's really bothersome? I typically like to see things removed for at least 30 days, if not 45 days, to really get a sense. And then a reintroduction to see how people feel when they reintroduce it. Some things, maybe there's no change. Others, like gluten in particular, gluten's a big one, dairy's a big one. Unfortunately, sometimes people do better with like sheep or goat's milk dairy, but they don't do well with A1 cow milk dairy. Maybe they do better with A2, but I think so much of it's very bio-individual.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? What else don't you eat? What else will you know? I agree. I mean, the alcohol is such an obvious one that I think we should just, anyone who's worn a sleep tracking device and has drank alcohol can see the obvious results, right? It's just so clear that it wrecks your sleep, which causes you to function worse, which causes all sorts of other problems. That's like an obvious one as well. I'm the same way. Don't drink, maybe once or twice a year socially with my wife or something like that. But my wife also, she cut out recently. Last year, she cut out gluten and alcohol because she just was like, oh, I don't know, my stomach doesn't feel good. I'm going to stop drinking and cut out gluten. She wasn't even really, no one would have considered her overweight. She lost 15 pounds in like 2 months without even trying. Now she's like, I don't want to lose any more weight. Like, okay, we got to introduce some more healthy fats and healthy foods. So she's doing all that now. It's just amazing. Some people just give up bread and their life changes, just simple things like that. But yeah, I'm curious, what else is like a definite no for you?
Well, I'm going to sound like a wet blanket to your listeners, but for me, let me be clear. Removing gluten put 3 autoimmune conditions into remission. So for me, it's really a byproduct of health maintenance. So I've been gluten-free for 12 years. I've been dairy-free for 7. For me, being dairy-free, I think I didn't realize that the little bit of dairy I was eating was really creating a lot of havoc in my body. I sporadically eat grains. I mean, most other things, it's really like, I really do lean into that nutrient density. I try to eat enough protein, eat enough brightly pigmented fruits and vegetables. I drink a lot of water. I know to a lot of people that may not sound very appealing, but for me, it works for me and it does not feel restrictive. And I think that's really what it comes down to is whatever we're doing, we want it to be sustainable. So if someone says to me, my greatest joy in life is having sourdough bread once a month, I would say, okay, well, like maybe realistically being gluten-free is not going to work for you, but we want it to be sustainable. You don't want it to feel like a punishment. And so I think it's really reflecting on, how does food make you feel? Are you at a healthy weight? Are you metabolically healthy? For me, my kryptonite, ironically enough, is, I always say, like, I do fine with dark chocolate. Like, that's my vice. Like I say, I have one vice left. I love dark chocolate, but I can have, and you could see if you were in my pantry, I can have bars of chocolate, dark chocolate in my pantry for months, and I can just have a little bit here and there. But if you give me a gluten-free brownie or a cookie, oh gosh, I mean, that it's like one becomes many. And so I just don't keep those things in my house. I will make them for my kids and my husband, but I'm definitely one of those people. Like, I realize what my kryptonite is and I try not to have it around. It's just one becomes more than one, and then it dysregulates my blood sugar and then I feel terrible. And so I think for each one of us, it's really fair. Like, what makes you feel good? What doesn't make you feel good? Eat more of what makes you feel good and avoid what doesn't. And if you can't moderate, eliminate. Like, that is a big prevailing philosophy within my mindset, within my work, is that things you cannot moderate, like for me, the gluten-free brownie and cookie, I just don't have them around. But things I can moderate, like dark chocolate, I can have those around. It's not a big deal. But if your kryptonite is kept in your house, you're setting yourself up for failure. Like someone was saying the other day, and I was actually shocked that they admitted this, they love Doritos. And they're like, I keep these little snack packs of Doritos in my house. And I thought, well, we just need to find a healthier version of that for you. But if one little bag becomes 2 or 3, then you're going from not being able to moderate. Maybe it's time to eliminate. And so I think I had recommended they try like a Siete brand tortilla chip. I was like, that's a healthier option. And there's a lot less in the bag. So it's not going to be economical. But if you really want that salty, crunchy, option, then that's probably a cleaner option for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds very familiar to the type of stuff that I do. And I think what people don't realize is that as you change the way you eat, and you start feeling better, like for me personally, like when I look at like bread or a piece of cake, like it's funny, I was out to dinner recently at some conference and everyone was eating, like they brought out like this pizza bread thing and everyone's eating it and they try to pass it to me. I'm like, no, thank you. And they're like, oh no. And I said, no, I haven't eaten bread in probably 10, 11 years or something like that. And they're like, oh, I feel so bad for you. I'm like, no, please don't. I feel great. I don't even crave it. I literally, when I look at the bread or like a piece of cake, I'm literally thinking to myself, ugh, that's like, if I eat that, I'm going to feel so awful. And so my body's kind of been trained for this other different type of reward system. So you can change what your body craves over time. And I think it's important for people to realize that. For me personally, also, when I travel, as much as possible, I'll try to get an Airbnb because I know if I don't cook my own food, 3 days of just eating out every meal, I can feel such a huge difference. And I even ask at restaurants, what kind of oil are you cooking this with? And if it's like canola oil, it's like, nope. If they say all we use is olive oil, okay, fine. I'm okay with that. But I'm the guy who is I'm the waiter's worst nightmare. But I'm okay with that. I'm asking what kind of oils. I'm asking all sorts of questions. Asking them to they're like, oh, you have a gluten allergy? Well, I'm just gluten free. Like, so, that's me. And it's what I have to do to feel good. Otherwise, I can feel it. Feel a difference.
Yeah, and I think it's important to be our own best advocates. I jokingly say if there's a True Food kitchen wherever I'm traveling to, I'll just do Uber Eats if I'm staying at a hotel when I am too tired to go out to eat. But I agree with you. We have to be our own best advocates. There's no shame in asking how things are prepared. And sometimes it's just super simple to say, if you're going to do my steak, can you just grill it? Or can you just do my vegetables with butter, real butter? Or can you just saute my vegetables and, not use any oil? I think that is completely fine. And that's actually why we don't eat out a whole lot. Mm-hmm. Actually, I think we cook better than most of the restaurants we go to. But, for me, when you're traveling, people will say, what protein bars do you bring? And I was like, I bring beef jerky. I bring salted macadamia nuts. I bring some dark chocolate. I bring electrolytes. I keep it pretty simple. And sometimes if there's really nothing to eat in an airport and traveling back and forth across the US, sometimes there are great airports for food and others they're not. But more often than not, I can get a naked burger with a salad and I'll usually just eat that. And that has worked out for me pretty well as I make my traversing across the United States and back.
Yeah. Well, Cynthia, this has been amazing. I'm sure people will want to know. You've got a big following on social media. You got your website. You got your book. Please tell everyone about how to follow you and learn more.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I have an amazing podcast called Everyday Wellness, and I would love for everyone to subscribe and check that out. Probably easiest to find me on my website, and I'm most active on Instagram. I have a free Facebook group that's called Intermittent Fasting Lifestyle. There are men and women in that group. It is a drama-free zone because I have zero tolerance for drama. I'm snarky on Twitter or X if you see me there. And we're slowly growing subscribers on YouTube. So you definitely want to check me out there as well. We are now we're kind of slowly doing it, posting all of our full-length podcasts there too.
Amazing. And what's the website?
Oh, sorry, that would help. www.cynthiathurlow.com. It's very simple to find me.
Yep. And on social, just your name for all the handles?
Typically, although it's interesting, I used to have a different business name. And when my second TEDx talk went viral, I realized that no one could find me because they didn't know that's what my business name was. So on Twitter, I am Cynthia Thurlow _. And then on Instagram, it's Cynthia _Thurlow _. Long story. I could not make them synonymous. That was totally a source of frustration. But Cynthia Thurlow NP is usually where you'll find me.
Amazing. Cynthia, thank you so much and for sharing your knowledge here with everyone today. And I hope we could do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, can you please leave us a rating or review and subscribe? I've realized that while we have actually increased our downloads a lot, we're actually getting a lot of downloads, which I'm really happy about. We actually have very few ratings. And I realized that I've never asked people really to rate much. So I'm asking you now if you could please rate and review and subscribe. And if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to anyone that you think will get value out of this. Also, if you haven't checked out our line of products at buypeakperformance.com, you get 20% off your first order. That's www.buypeakperformance.com. We have some incredible products, including our organic high-altitude coffee. If you don't know this, coffee is one of the most heavily sprayed with pesticides out of any crop. So it's really important that you drink organic coffee. We've gone above and beyond to source what we believe is the highest quality and healthiest organic coffee in the world. We're also famous for our organic green superfood powder. You can get 20% off of that as well at buypeakperformance.com. We also have an organic vegan and paleo plant protein. See, most of the vegan proteins out there are using brown rice protein, which is really not a good source of protein, and it's also a grain. And if you're paleo, you know that grains tend to cause inflammation in some cases for some people. And so we wanted to make one that was paleo friendly and vegan and organic. We made an amazing amino acid profile, so it's really one of the best plant proteins for muscle building. So you can check out Peak Performance Organic Plant Protein. You can find that on our website. Of course, all our products are on Amazon as well. So thanks again. And again, please, if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to someone who you feel can get value out of it. And please leave us a rating, review, and subscribe. Thank you.